Hello, everybody.
Hi.
And welcome to this very special session of the New York Society for General Semantics. This is the inaugural Alan Flagg lecture. And for those of you who are not familiar with who that is, Alan Flagg became interested in general semantics in 1952 and eventually served for many years as president of the New York Society for General Semantics. So we wouldn't be here today if not for Alan. In fact, I wouldn't be here today if not for Alan, because he first roped me into doing stuff for general semantics for the Institute of General Semantics, for which he was a trustee, as well as the New York Society for General Semantics. He taught general semantics himself, classes at IBM, the New School, Queens College, and Fairfield University. And in 2008, he was a recipient of the IGS's J. Talbot Winchell Award for service, outstanding service to general semantics. So I want to add also that Alan also had a great interest in consciousness and human potential, and was for a long time the vice president of the Friends of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And so to honor Alan, a lecture series has been established in his name, and we're very pleased to have as the first of this lecture series Martin H. Levinson, who's known Alan for many years. Forever. And a day. And he has titled his talk, General Semantics as a Conversing Activity. A very original title, of course. Those of you, of course, many of you may recognize it as a play on Neil Postman's titles, Teaching as a Subversive Activity and Teaching as a Conserving Activity. So general semantics as a conversing activity. And after his talk, Marty will read from his recently published book, Practical Fairy Tales for Everyday Living. And I should note that we have copies of that book, which was published by the Institute of General Semantics, for sale, with the unique opportunity of having Marty actually sign the books for you, which will greatly increase its value when you put it up for sale on eBay. And who is Marty Levinson, you might ask?
I was asking.
Yes. Who is this guy? Where does he come from?
Talented teacher, writer.
You got it. There we have a testimonial. A talented teacher and writer, and the president of the Institute of General Semantics, as well as the treasurer of the New York Society for General Semantics, and the book review editor for Etc., a review of general semantics. And he's published 10 books, numerous articles and poems on a variety of subjects, and holds a PhD from New York University. And again, I do want to add that we here at the New York Society do not charge any membership dues, and we do not charge anyone fees for attending these events. This is all brought to you free, and what we do is encourage you to join the Institute of General Semantics and become a member and receive, etc., through that. And also I want to note, looking ahead, that after this, our next event will be on May 1st. Our May Day celebration will be with Seamus Kelleher, a well-known singer-songwriter, guitarist, who will give a talk and also treat us to some music in between his tours on these kind of Irish music circuit of the eastern seaboard. So that's something we can look forward to. But for tonight, So a lot that we can be grateful for and look forward to. And so I'll turn it over to Marty Levinson.
Ta-da!
Thank you, Lynn. Very good. Take out my board. Okay, well, good evening. Glad you could all make it. Tonight you will be getting a twofer. The first Alan Flagg lecture and a reading of my book, Practical Fairy Tales for Everyday Living. Before I begin the lecture, which is, I hope, the first of many Alan Flagg lectures, I want to thank Cynthia Danzig, who is right behind me. Cynthia, you want to stand up? Yes, let's keep Cynthia around. I'll tell you what. Cynthia's a longtime friend of Alan's and the New York Society of General Semantics, and she came up with the idea of having an Alan Flagg lecture series. And I want to say a little bit about Alan Flagg, but I think Lance looked at his obituary as I did and took some of the information that I was going to tell you, so I'll tell you some of the things he left out. Lance mentioned that in 1952 he became interested in General Semantics, then served as the president of the New York Society. He did teach classes at the IBM, New School, Queens College, and Fairfield University. Alan was a polymath with a wide range of interests, among them chess, movies, oysters. This is the obituary. He never told me about oysters. Survival stories in ancient Egypt. He also enjoyed investigating the mysteries of the universe, particularly consciousness, having studied Julius James' famous work on the subject. And Alan was a benefactor member of the New York Roadrunners, collecting many trophies from that organization. Right. Alan never stopped learning. His one-bedroom apartment on East 36th Street was filled with so many books that it was almost impossible to go from room to room without tripping over some of them. Alan was a bright, cultured Renaissance man who wanted to make the world a saner and better place. And if it isn't that way today, it wasn't for Alan's want of trying. Part of which trying included keeping the New York Society for General Semantics afloat for many years before his death in 2016 at the tender age of 93. I am honored to be the first Alan Flagg lecturer and hope it's the start of a great tradition of talks that carry the name of a very good and special human being. And now to the lecture, and it's a 20-minute talk, it's too painful to know it's only 20 minutes. But afterwards, also we'll do the book reading, which should be fun. All right. My title for the talk is General Semantics as a Conversive Activity. In 1967, Neil Postman and Charles Weingartner published a book titled Teaching as a Subversive Activity. 12 years later, Postman published a book titled Teaching as a Conserving Activity, saying, "The Earth has gone around the sun 12 times since the publication of our," meaning his and Weingartner's, best-known book, Teaching as a Subversive Activity. I do not seem to be facing in the same direction as I was in 1967. Frankly, I do not know if I have turned or everything else has. But many of the arguments which then seemed nearly opposite now seem acutely opposite, and this book is the result of that change in perspective. I have titled my talk General Semantics as a Conversive Activity, in part because I view the title as a bit of an homage to the works of Neil Postman, and in part because I view General Semantics as a conversive activity. That is, an activity that has to do with the process of conversion and change, and an activity that is highly social. I was introduced to General Semantics in 1978 to a continuing education course at Cooper Union titled How to Improve Your Thinking and Communicating Ability. The course really should have been entitled General Semantics 101, as People in Quandaries was the textbook for it, and the teacher, Harry Maynard, an advertising executive for Time Life and the president of the General Semantics Foundation, was teaching similar introductory GS courses throughout the city. I had taken the course because the subject sounded interesting to me, and I thought I could use the information I learned from it to help the middle school students I was counseling in the working class section of Queens. After the first session, I was hooked on GS, which seemed to me to be a highly useful operational philosophy for solving everyday problems. And I asked the instructor for a reading list of General Semantics books to peruse in my spare time. At the beginning of the second session, Maynard announced that the General Semantics Foundation would pay $500 to any doctoral student who presented the foundation with a completed PhD dissertation that had General Semantics in the title. That idea intrigued me, as I was enrolled in a doctoral program at NYU, was fascinated with General Semantics, had not come up with a subject for a dissertation proposal, and if I complied with Maynard's requirements to deliver to the General Semantics Foundation a completed PhD dissertation that had General Semantics in the title, I would receive grant money for my research. After giving the matter some thought, I came up with an idea for a doctoral dissertation that involved devising and using a GS curriculum with the young people I was counseling to reduce student alienation. More specifically, I would conduct an experimental study with groups of students exposed to General Semantics and groups of students in control groups who would be given a standard guidance curriculum, and then I would test the group to see which one were less alienated towards school at the end of the semester. I presented this idea to the chairperson of my dissertation committee, who was quite pleased with the notion. I believe in large part because no doctoral student in our department, which was the Department of Organizational and Administrative Studies, had ever done an experimental study. He was also enthused about the possibility of me using the big mainframe computer that was housed in the basement of one of the NYU buildings on campus for my study, as he was one of the few people in our department who knew how to use the thing. He told me that if I could find someone at NYU who had expertise in General Semantics and would agree to serve my committee, he would approve my proposal. I luckily did find someone at NYU, that person being Neil Postman. I forget what department he was in at the time, which was the... was it English department?
Education.
Okay. Who was very...
It was communication.
Who was communication. That's what the communication department there, and was very familiar with General Semantics. Among other things, Neil at the time was serving as editor of ETC Review of General Semantics. Neil graciously consented to serve as my dissertation advisor. Working with Neil was a total delight. I met with him far more than my other two dissertation advisors because he gave me a lot of practical suggestions for moving my work forward, and because he had a wonderful sense of humor that I really enjoyed. One of his suggestions saved me many hours of needless work. At the time I was in the PhD program at NYU, I had to demonstrate competency in two tools in addition to whatever else you would, not me, but everyone in the program had to demonstrate competency in two tools in addition to whatever else you would put the expertise in to receive your degree. Typically in my department, those two tools were statistics and a foreign language. I was okay with learning statistics as I was doing an experimental study and would be using statistics in my work. But studying a foreign language seemed a bridge too far, as I was almost 100% sure I would not be reading material in any language other than English for my research. When I complained to Neil about this, he suggested I consider using General Semantics as one of my tools, and present the idea to the chairperson of my dissertation committee, which I did. To my relief, the idea was okay. With the proviso that Professor Postman would have to certify that I was knowledgeable in General Semantics. To comply with that dictum, Neil came up with a novel approach. He told me to construct a written test that one could give to measure someone's knowledge of General Semantics, and if he thought it did the job, he would approve it. I did what I was told, Neil accepted my efforts, and that test was later published in the General Semantics Bulletin. The statistical testing I did at the end of my study showed that the GS groups I worked with were significantly less alienated towards school than the control groups. I was very gratified with those results, and I received my degree. I was determined after I received my degree to continue to use GS in my professional and personal life. During the 1980s, I became assistant director of a school-based drug prevention program. And in that capacity, I was able to hire Milton Dawes, who for as long as I can remember has been working under the rubric Institute of General Semantics Ambassador at Large, to drive down to Montreal in the fall and the spring of each year to do GS trainings with our staff, who greatly benefited from them, telling me that they found the trainings highly useful in their work in counseling students and in solving problems in their own lives. During the 1980s, I was also admitted into a primary certificate program sponsored by the Institute of Rational Living, which is known today as the Albert Ellis Institute. During this program, I studied with Dr. Ellis, the founder of Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, and a man who was considered one of the most influential psychotherapists of the 20th century. I was allowed into the program, which was advertised as being only open to psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers, because Ellis was a big fan of General Semantics, saying that many of the ideas of Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy were based on GS formulations, which he claimed to have discovered after he came up with this theory of REBT. During my studies at the Institute of Rational Living, I took a workshop with a young psychologist who ran over the time allotted to her. That turned out to be a bad move, as Dr. Ellis was scheduled to run a workshop in the room we were in right after hers was over, and he let her know about his displeasure by storming into the room and screaming at her. This surprised me because I thought screaming was not a particularly rational response on Ellis's part. And I was even more surprised when the young psychologist began to cry after being yelled at. But I really shouldn't have been surprised, as it's been my experience in life that to practice what you preach 100% of the time is really impossible. And I've deviated many times from applying GS formulations when it would have been to my benefit and the benefit to those I was dealing with not to have done so. I've gone to lots of AKML talks. For those not familiar with the acronym AKML, it stands for Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture. Korzybski was the one who founded GS, which are talks related to General Semantics that have occurred annually since 1952. One of the strangest and most interesting AKML talks I attended took place in 1992. The AKML speaker that year was Steve Allen. Some of you in the crowd are old enough to know Steve Allen. The millennials, maybe not. The AKML speaker that year was Steve Allen, an American television personality, radio personality, musician, composer, actor, comedian, writer, advocate of scientific skepticism, and a proponent of General Semantics. In a book he published titled Dumped, 81 Ways to Make America Smarter, he listed as Way 81, Learn General Semantics. In September 1954, Allen achieved national fame as the first host of The Tonight Show, which was the first late-night television talk show. When Allen got up to the lectern and deliver his AKML address, he made a few perfunctory remarks about himself, and then he asked that index cards be distributed to the members of the audience so they could write down questions for him. He spent the rest of the evening answering those questions, and I thought, paraphrasing Wittgenstein, the limits of those questions will be the limits of his speech. By the way, I want to give a shout out to Lance Straight, who gave last year's AKML talk, which if you missed it, you missed a terrific one that was heroically put together by Lance at the last minute, as our scheduled 2018 AKML speaker took ill in the final week before the talk was to be delivered. This year's AKML talk, which will take place October 11th at the Princeton Club, will be given by Nadine Strossen, a law professor and the immediate past president of the ACLU, who will be talking about hate speech. More information about her talk and how to register for it can be found on the Institute of General Semantics website, which you should go to not only to see about her talk, but to become a member of the Institute and help, with paying for your society. You are partners in all this. During the 1990s, I decided to see if I could get a book published applying GS ideas and formulations to the drug problem. So I pitched that idea to a number of presses and wound up signing with Greenwood, promising to deliver a finished manuscript in 6 months. Although I didn't think it would take me that long, since I thought I was a pretty fast writer and was really up on the subject. 5 years later, I made good on my promise. And in 2002, my book, The Drug Problem, A New View Using the General Semantics Approach, was published. Since then, I have published 3 additional GS-related books, the latest of which I will be reading from tonight. In the first decade of the 21st century, I was asked to join the board of the Institute of General Semantics, which I did. The Institute was in the process of merging with the International Society for General Semantics, an organization founded by S.I. Hayakawa in 1943 to popularize Korzybski's ideas. Sadly, 60 years later, both the Institute and the International Society had fallen on hard times, and only one of them, the Institute of General Semantics, would survive, mainly due to a large endowment from the estate of Charlotte Schuchart Reed, a director of the Institute of General Semantics, who was executive secretary to Korzybski before his death in 1950, and her husband Alan Walker Reed, a linguist and Columbia University professor, perhaps best known for his studies into the words okay and fuck. By the way, the New Yorker did a wonderful essay on Alan and the word and his finding out the derivation of the word okay. Google it. It's just, but Alan's known for okay more than fuck, but he was interested in all kinds of curse words. Interesting guy. Okay. The Institute had been located in Brooklyn, a place I am partial to, having grown up in the borough of underdogs and churches during the 1950s. But the new director of the merged organization wanted to move the Institute to Fort Worth, Texas, as he was from that area. A majority of the IGS trustees went along with his wishes, and for several years the Institute was located in Fort Worth, the 15th largest city in the United States and the home of the only cowgirl museum in the country. I visited it. It's worth visiting, by the way. In 2011, the IGS board voted to relocate IGS headquarters to New York City, the most populous city in the United States and home to over 120 colleges and universities. The New York Society for General Semantics is also headquartered in the Big Apple, so I suppose one could argue that New York City is ground zero for the promulgation of general semantics ideas, although I suppose one could also argue that physical presence is only one of many factors in getting information out into the world. Books are also an important means to transmit knowledge, and in short order I will be reading from one. But before I do, does anyone have any questions or comments on my talk?
Perfect.
Perfect.
Those are the kind of comments the speaker likes to hear.
Excellent.
Have you eaten at the Cowgirl Hall of Fame in the Village?
Is there one?
I don't know if it's still there. It was a great restaurant. The chicken fried chicken is particularly good.
Wow. Thank you for that tip. I'll look for it. Any other comments or questions? Okay.
Are they dressed up like cowgirls, the servants?
No, but it's decorated as this is theatrically with all sorts of memorabilia about cowgirls historically. So it's not just Western-style food. It actually is a paean to cowgirls in the history of the United States. So it's well worth a visit.
Thank you. And as
My
I
wife is
said,
there right now, should I call her? I'm not joking.
oh, there really is still
Really,
around?
she's up there with the girls' night, so I could call her, maybe have her send a picture.
Have her send food over. That would be good. Seriously, if you get a picture, that would be fun. Thank you. That's news to me. And again, if you're ever in Fort Worth, I like Fort Worth, but I think it was a silly place for the Institute. But I should, hopefully the former director's not there here in the crowd. But he was from there, and he did give it a try. Okay, so now I'm going to read from my book, which you're all going to buy later on, because these proceeds will support the Institute of General Semantics, so I won't be making the money, but you'll be helping the Institute. And the book is Practical Fairy Tales for Everyday Living, which is the latest addition to the Institute of General Semantics non-Aristotelian book series. And a book that after my reading this evening, that I hope you will purchase for the discount price of $10. You can't get this book cheaper. Put it on the street.
Hey.
Is this the same one that you published?
No, this is the revised one.
Oh.
This is the better book.
Revised in what way?
Revised, well, much of the...
It's a
there was
director's
form-
cut.
Right.
$20.
That's right. Well, seriously, Howard, well, there's more information. And I took the book, which originally, it was a 2007, I think, was the first edition. And it was, I thought it was good, but people, suggested for improvement. And I went back and I updated it.
Oh,
I mean, I'll give you an example of the updating, and I'll read from the first fairy tale. There are 24 fairy tales in the book. And in the first fairy tale, there's an interview, we'll see later, between a TV personality and a beaver. So the TV personality at that time in the first edition was Charlie Rose.
Oh.
Right, so he had to go. He wanted to sell for the Me Too movement, he had to come out. And I replaced Charlie with Christiane Amanpour. Good move, Marty, okay. So, right, well, marketing is important. By the way, titles are important. Practical, it's a good title, and I think so, because people seem to like it. But at any event, but also a lot of the content, and I thought it more entertaining for people. It should be an entertaining book, and I'm trying to get General Semantics concepts across in an entertaining manner. As Neil Postman commented, this is the time when we're entertaining ourselves, amusing ourselves to death. And of course, and entertainment's important in terms of selling books and getting people to read books and getting people to listen to. Well, anyway, I won't go into that, but that's the reason why it was. So it's totally not totally, but in large part revised. The pictures are the same. So if you bought the first copy, you'll recognize the pictures, which were done by a professional illustrator, then up on Johnson. And again, I'm hoping you'll purchase the book, which I say will make the author feel that all those hours he spent writing it and not watching television, reading novels, or surfing the internet were worth it. So, I mean, $10, what the hell. Okay, so let me start out with the introduction to the book. The American Heritage Dictionary defines the term fairy tale as a fictitious, highly fanciful story or explanation. Can such a narrative furnish useful advice on important topics like sound thinking, smart decision-making, stress reduction, emotional self-management, and getting along better with others? This book answers in the affirmative. Practical Fairy Tales for Everyday Living provides 24 whimsical stories featuring characters who successfully battle a variety of personal problems and mishaps through the formulation of General Semantics, a science-based self-help system designed to assist individuals to better evaluate and solve everyday difficulties and gain a more accurate picture of themselves and the world in which they live. While the stories are not true in the literal sense of the word, the British writer G.K. Chesterton observed, fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us dragons exist, but because they tell us dragons can be beaten. Some of the stories you will find here contain plot elements from familiar literary classics and children's fairy tales. Others offer completely original scenarios. All the stories have in common a desire to inform and entertain with a bit of humor. That was my purpose in writing these tales, and I hope that is your experience in reading them. So what I'm going to do now, I'll read a few of these, but I'll read the first fairy tale in the book, the one I just spoke about earlier, which is titled Bucky the Time-Binding Beaver.
is this a new one?
You'll tell me. Once upon a time, in a beguiling little burg near Beaverton, Oregon, there lived a beaver named Bucky, who was in the construction business. Bucky's specialty was erecting dams, specifically beaver dams. These barriers help to create the deep water that is needed for winter food storage. Beavers have been putting up dams the same way for thousands of years, and they are pretty good at it. One spring day, Dr. Donald R. Griffin, by the way, there's a footnote here, this is the real Dr. Griffin, who's a professor, an American zoology professor and the founder of the field of animal cognition, came to Beaverton. He wanted to capture a beaver and implants a human brain into its skull. That's the fairy tale. Griffin thought beavers were clever critters. He was always telling his students, and this is true, when we think of the kinds of animal behavior that suggest conscious thinking, the beaver naturally comes to mind. That's an accurate quote of his. Bucky was sitting on a log, happily munching a water lily tuber and flapping his tail when Griffin and a group of fellow zoological researchers surrounded him. They anesthetized the hapless mammal, put him in a bag, and took him to a laboratory at Oregon State University, the home of the beavers. In the lab, Griffin surgically inserted a human brain into Bucky's head. When the operation was over and the anesthetic had worn off, Griffin asked Bucky how he felt. Bucky responded, "I feel a little tired, but other than that, I feel fine." "How did the Beavers do today? Did they beat UCLA?" Bucky quickly became a highly visible TV talk show guest, appearing on ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and C-SPAN. The latter station featured Bucky's testimony to a congressional subcommittee on animal rights. In flying around the country to do interviews, Bucky was amazed by the diversity of human architecture that he saw. He discussed his amazement of man-made edifices on CNN with Christian Amanpour. The following is an excerpt from that show, and here's the dialogue between the two. Amanpour: "What did you do for a living before your brain operation, Bucky?" Bucky: "I was in construction, Christiane, mostly dam building." Amanpour: "How did that work out for you?" Bucky: "Not bad. I wasn't the best dam builder in the world, but I built some pretty good dams. I took a CNN news crew out to see one of them last week." Amanpour: "What do you think the major difference is between beaver and human structures?" Bucky: "I believe the biggest difference is that your species improves its erections with every generation, while beavers keep building the same damn dam." Amanpour: "Alfred Korzybski, the originator of General Semantics, had the same thought about human technological progress. He said humans are a time-binding class of life. Time binders use language and other symbols to transmit information across time, which enables each generation to start where the last one left off. He labeled animals a space-binding class of life. Space binders transform energy into movement through space. Space binders can't convey information over time because they lack language and other forms of communication." Bucky: "I wish my space-binding beaver friends would evolve a little so they could imitate their time-binding human cousins." Amanpour: "Maybe someday they will. In the meantime, because humans possess a quarter of an inch of cortex, our species remains on the top rung of the evolutionary ladder." Bucky: "Well put, Christiane. I like the idea of distinguishing animals from humans on the basis of brain structure." Amanpour: "So did Korzybski. He came up with the notion that a quarter of an inch of cortex separates animals from human beings. And because I'm a time binder, I was able to read and grasp what he said." Bucky: "Good for you, Christiane, and good for your species. Time binding has enabled your genus to make countless advances. You've produced the Golden Gate Bridge, personal computer, and rocket ship to go to the moon. What have beavers done? You're still building your basic beaver dam and beaver lodge." Amanpour: "Buck up, Bucky. You're one of us now. Your ability to use human language has made you a fellow time binder. Perhaps you should consider relinquishing your beaver identity." Bucky: "I'm not sure that I want to do that. While I see the advantages of time binding and furthering human technology, I don't see similar gains being made in the area of human relations. People fight a lot with each other, and with so many atomic weapons around, there's a good chance humankind might wipe itself out." Amanpour: That's a good point. Korzybski also noticed the disparity between the strides humans made in technology and the lack of progress people have shown in interpersonal relations. To lessen that gap, he came up with General Semantics, a theoretical and practical system of critical thinking that involves the use of the scientific method and special language strategies to solve problems of everyday living. It's a pity more folks are not familiar with his work. Bucky, maybe I can help to popularize General Semantics. I think I'll mention it when I'm on the PBS NewsHour tonight. I can also put in a plug for General Semantics when I appear on Meet the Press this weekend. And I will drop a reference to General Semantics on The Voice next week. I'm singing a song in that show for my new album, Leave It to Beaver. Amanpour, my goodness, you certainly are an eager beaver. I'm milking this for to get General Semantics out to the public. Bucky, you're right, Christiane, I am. I don't want the planet destroyed because of human stupidity. I want people to cooperate and work on advancing civilization. Amanpour, that's a noble sentiment, Bucky. Is there anything else you want? Bucky, I'd like to put up condos and office buildings in New York and Miami. I've had it with building beaver dams. There's just no future in that line of work. Amanpour, well, I'll be damned. That's the finish. Yay. I see a lot of book borrowers here. That's good. So, any comments or questions about that's the first of the 24 fairy tales in the book. And I was trying to introduce time binding, which is a seminal formulation of General Semantics, and doing it in a humorous way that wouldn't be too painful to people to figure out. Yes?
Were beavers used as somewhat of a metaphor that there's another mammal that changes the environment?
I guess you could use it that way.
Yeah.
I think the reason I used beavers was in 1978, Maynard talked about beavers and beaver dams.
Right.
Basically, that's and also this fellow that I spoke about, this doctor, his name now, Griffin. Yeah. It turns out he really is the father of animal cognition, and he did have the statement about beavers, which I thought was perfect for the story. But your thought is a good one. Any other questions or comments before I go on?
It's the national Canada, it's the national animal of Canada.
National, sorry?
Animal of Canada. The animal of Canada, the national.
The beaver.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and, yes, I think that's right. New York City, there were lots of beavers back in the day, the 1600s. Yeah. Okay, so should we move on from beavers to another story?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. No, yes.
I'm interested, why do you call them fairy tales? They sound more, fairy tales tend to have always been used to teach.
Right.
But they rarely were used to teach didactically, like
Right.
this means this.
Right.
This sounds more like an allegory, like a Pilgrim's Progress, or even a early Renaissance or late medieval morality play, where you're using the story to sort of ferret out concept. But I don't hear any
Beaver, not fairy.
in fairy tales. In other words, Chesterton was very clear about fairyland being a very dangerous place. And I came here specifically to call upon Chesterton.
Right.
And
Well, I could have called it classical morality tale.
No.
I'm taking some liberties. Have you ever watched Rocky and his Friends on television? Fractured fairy tales.
Yeah.
So these are what I would call, you could consider them fractured fairy tales. Yes.
so, my biggest concern with my kids was that as they grew up, they learned the fractured fairy tales first. And therefore...
Well, that's your fault, isn't it? It's your own fault. You didn't teach them
I think it's my own fault, I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, it's a whole culture of fractured fairy tales in me. Who wins? So I'm concerned that because the word fairy and fairy tale carries with it a deep integrity. And each tale is a tale, it's not a narrative. And of course, to sell a book or to get the point out, but fairy tales are not fiction. And one scholar said at one point, an interesting quote, they never were and always are.
That is an
So,
interesting quote.
and that would be, by putting this together, that would be an Aristotelian take on the fairy tales. That would not be a non-Aristotelian sort of understanding. It would be looking for the form, looking for the form and seeing it more as a way of integrating and using story in a way to complete, not to didactically break out. I mean, it's a wonderful teaching tool.
Yeah.
I just felt that the fairy tale is,
It didn't work for you because it was...
no, I don't think it's a fairy tale.
Okay, that's fine, yeah.
Fable. Fable.
Practical fables.
Yeah,
whoever
not
did
my,
it.
my little leg.
Okay. So now we're going, any other questions or comments?
When you re-revise it.
That's right, the third edition. Stay tuned, life has changed. That's another General Semantics formulation. All right, this one's called The Wizard of Is. Where did I steal that title? Okay. This is the story of Bessie the Boastrous, a blustering woman who was not an easy person to talk to. You think I'm exaggerating that Bessie was not easy to talk to? Consider the following conversation between Bessie and her co-worker Mary. Mary. I saw The Godfather at a revival film festival yesterday. I really enjoyed it. Bessie. That was the best movie ever made. Nothing comes close to it. Mary. Well, I've liked other movies equally well. I found Citizen Kane and Lawrence of Arabia quite entertaining. Bessie. They don't hold a candle to The Godfather. Francis Ford Coppola is the best director who ever lived, and nobody acts better than Brando and Pacino. You obviously don't know much about movies. Mary. Maybe not. But I know what I like. Anyway, after the movie, I went to the Museum of Modern Art and caught their latest exhibit. I found it quite interesting. Bessie, modern art isn't art. It's hype and pretense disguised as art. There's no real art anymore. Art went out with the 19th century. Mary, you're entitled to your opinion, Bessie, but I disagree. I think modern art is in every sense art. But let's talk about something else. Bessie. Okay. Did I tell you I went out to dinner at Chez Magnifique last night? Mary. No, you didn't. What did you think of the food? Bessie. It's the worst food in the city. No one could like that food. I'm surprised the restaurant is still in business. Mary. The New York Times gave Chez Magnifique 4 stars. Bessie. So what? That doesn't change the facts. The food in that restaurant stinks. Mary, whatever you say, Bessie. Listen, I can't talk anymore. I've got to get back to work. Weekends were tough for Bessie. Her dogmatic conversational style caused her to have no friends. And her parents didn't want her visiting them. Although she occasionally dated, Bessie was physically attractive and knew lots about all kinds of things. Her relationships never lasted long. Bessie's 2 main companions were her cat and her living room television. Dr. Flugelman, Bessie's therapist, had tried for many years to get Bessie to understand that her unequivocal positions turned people off. But he had been unsuccessful in helping her to see this. Dr. Flugelman, Bessie said, I tell it like it is. One day, Bessie told Flugelman that he was the worst psychiatrist in the world. He responded by saying, Bessie, I've worked with you for 5 years and we haven't made much progress. Perhaps you should see someone else. Bessie went home that night and spoke to her cat. Schrodinger, you're the only one I can communicate with. That's not a good situation for a 29-year-old woman who wants to get hitched and have children. I so want things to change for me. I really do. At that moment, her doorbell rang. It was Frank Wizard, a neighbor from the apartment across the hall. "Sorry to bother you, Bessie," he said. "Could I borrow a cup of sugar? My mom is coming to visit me and I want to bake her a cake." Bessie liked Frank. He was very muscular and he sported nifty tattoos that read, "I love Mom," on both his arms. He was also a gentleman. Frank always held the door open for Bessie in the building lobby. "No problem, Frank. Is it only sugar you need? I also have butter, flour, eggs, flavoring, a Williams & Sonoma rolling pin, a cutting board, a mixer, and a wide assortment of all-purpose baking pans." "Thanks, Bessie. I think the sugar will do just fine." "Okay, by the way, what kind of cake are you making?" "Devil's food cake." "That's not a great cake to make, Frank. It's too chocolaty." "My mom's a big fan of chocolate." "Suit yourself. I was only trying to be helpful." "Thanks, Bessie. I appreciate hearing your opinions." "I wasn't giving you an opinion, Frank. Devil's food cake does contain too much chocolate." "Bessie, when you say devil's food cake contains too much chocolate, you are telling me very little about what you are describing. You are telling me instead something about yourself. You are projecting your idea of what you consider to be too much chocolate. You are confusing opinions with facts." Bessie's positive feelings for Frank overrode her desire to debate. So she said, "That's interesting. What do you suggest I do about my confusion?" "I suggest you use qualifying expressions like 'it seems to me,' or 'as I see it,' or 'from my point of view,' when you talk about things like devil's food cake having too much chocolate in it. Such phrases signal to others that you are communicating your beliefs, not absolute truth." "Well, Frank, it seems that you know something about human communication. Are you a therapist?" "No, I'm a welder." "Well, what I do is a little like therapy. I repair damaged connections." Bessie liked the metaphor, but she also liked the metaphor maker, so she decided to level with him. "Frank, I've been told before that I have a problem separating what is going on in the world around me from what I say about it. Do you think you could help me to overcome that difficulty?" "I think I can, Bessie. I'm a student of General Semantics. And I've learned from that field that the word is can contribute to the problem you just described. When a person uses is to link a noun and an adjective modifying that noun, he or she may unconsciously project. For example, when you say he is lazy or she is smart, you're suggesting that laziness is found in him and that smartness is found in her. That contradicts what is really going on. We are projecting our opinions concerning laziness and to smartness onto other people. Qualifying our responses conveys that reality. For example, he seems lazy to me, or from my point of view, she is smart. Bessie's initial response to his remarks was, Frank is just perfect, and Frank is the smartest guy in the world. But she now knew that thinking that way was factually incorrect. To be more accurate, I should describe Frank as being perfect to me. And from my vantage point, Frank is the smartest man in the world. While she understood that reasoning in this manner would not be easy to do, Bessie resolved to give it a try. It took some time, but through perseverance and hard work, Bessie overcame her propensity for pomposity, and she married Frank. They moved to a house in the suburbs, where they live today with a Cocker Spaniel and 2 junior wizards. Frank manages his own construction company, and Bessie, who went back to school for a degree in positive psychology, is a highly successful personal coach and communications consultant. I know it's a fool's bet to prophesy that Betsy and Frank will live happily ever after, but at least for right now, they both seem pretty happy to me. So that's a good theory, so you have to get that right. Tell all your friends about the book. Okay. So any questions or comments about that one, other than it's not a real fairy tale? Yes.
Okay, this should be much better if it was a beta reading where you could take the criticism and incorporate it, but I'll give it to you anyway.
Third edition.
Bessie, I took notes, is an egocentric, hyperbolic, hypercritical, passive-aggressive self-aggrandizer, but she is not a boaster. There's not a single boast that she utters, and she is not talking about how good she is. She is implying that she is the final arbiter of taste, but I don't even think that is conscious as you present her. So labeling her a boaster leads to an impression to an expectation which is not fulfilled. Also, if I were your editor and I were suggesting how to present this, I would suggest that you rethink it entirely, and instead of a bunch of non-fairy tales, each with a little hitting it on the head thing about general semantics, that you put the quest about general semantics in the start with someone like a wizard or a master and an apprentice going on a quest and having individual chapters that are parables where the apprentice learns through the master how to use general semantics to negotiate the world, rather than someone giving a mini lecture of, hey, I know about general semantics and this is what you are doing and here is how you were doing it wrong and how general semantics would fix it, which gets boring even during the first example, let alone by the repetition. And having heard these two, I would be a little dubious about going on and reading the rest of them, because every single one of them would be like a General Semantics 101 teacher's thing of, here's an example, here's how Fred's doing it, here's how Fred's doing it wrong.
Okay.
So those are my, and in the words of Bessie, Devil's food doesn't have too much chocolate. It's not a very chocolate cake. German chocolate cake would have been a better example of a cake that is actually full of chocolate. You should have beta readers who are actually specialists in the areas you are making comments. And thirdly, if you want this to be a book for the ages, you are using so many modern-day American cultural reference that by the time the book is published, it's partially obsolete, and people who do not come from the same social and cultural context you do will miss what you are, the jokes you are putting in. And there are more subtle ways of doing it. There's nothing wrong with dropping a Lord and Taylor's here and there, but to be so dependent on it sounds a little bit too like cheap stand-up.
But what do you
I'm going to
really
hire you
think?
as my third editor for the third edition.
Is your name Betsy?
Yes.
All that I just heard, one word really stood out
Yes.
as an alternative to fairy tale as well as fable, parable. I think possibly when you re-edit your re-edition, you might want to think about one of either fable or parable as a
Practical
term.
parables.
That sounds
There's
nice.
alliteration there.
I like it. You like it.
Well, I'm not sure. No, I didn't say I like it, but I think. No, I like fairy tales. But that's okay. That's certainly a good suggestion. Thank you. Yes.
The beginning made me think of the old Jewish joke about, all the food there was terrible, it was just awful, and such small portions.
That's a good one.
You described, there's a lot of women like that in New York. At that age,
The next one is about a guy. Just letting you know.
at that age, that are single, and they're attractive, and they're educated, and the reason that they're single is because of just what you said, and I know that for a fact.
Because of all the ones you didn't marry.
No, because of speaking to them. I had worked for Verizon, and who else would call you up on a Sunday morning at 8 o'clock or 8:15, and in the end, it's not about their phone, but how great they are and how beautiful. There's nobody out there for them, and they can't understand why.
See what you learn when you come to these lectures. It's very interesting. Yes, any other questions or comments? The next one is, to be fair, that the guy is going to look... I'm conscious of this. Yes.
To understand the general semantics so a person comes from a culture, they're Italian or they're Greek.
Yeah.
or they're Jewish, and they say this stuff stinks. Everyone knows they don't mean literally the way it's being read, and at least in that culture, and people who took it that way would be the ones responsible for misunderstanding what's being said. It's not clear to me, so I'm asking now about general semantics, right? Yeah. So it seems to me that there's a huge emphasis on real literalness in communication. And it sounds to me that most human communication has a lot of non-literal tags to it. So you don't need, really, if you talk to someone who was Blanche brought up as Jewish, who keeps saying, that's your opinion, it's a nudge. It's a person who's continually almost not willing to say, you know what, you're right, it's a little too rich, but I like it anyway, because you know what's being said. So I'm wondering, and I keep thinking that there's one of these models of communication that's transmitter, I'm trying to say this, are you getting it? Yes, how can I help you? Then there's another model, and everything else is noise, right? There's another model of communication where the real community is in the noise. And there are cultures where the ambiguity of dialogue is the basis of relationship. Yeah. Because it's rich, not because it's not manipulative.
I'm
right?
very much agreeing with you. And part of the problem was when I first learned general semantics back in 1978, I was really gung-ho. And so what I would do is I would correct people. What a dummy. So basically what I'm giving you is information that you really need to use selectively. So if someone says, that's a great movie, and you say, well, you don't really mean great, you should say, to me, that's the end of the conversation. They'll walk away. So the point is, you have to be smart, but also when you're in the conversation, you can tell yourself, they really mean to me, when I talk, I really mean to them, and it might help to avoid an argument occasionally. That's the greatest movie. Well, in your opinion it is, and you can sort of inject it sort of this way, but if you do it directly, like I'm doing here, because it's supposed to be funny in the book, it's disaster. So I agree with you there. You've got to pick your spot. And if a person's ready for it, that's fine. But also, sometimes a person learns general semantics, feels, oh, they know so much more than other people, and they're willing to educate them. Not good. For both parties. But that's a good comment. I agree with you. So, any other comments or questions? All right, we'll do the third one. And this was a fellow. This is called Charlie and the Reality Theory.
This is in the new book, not the old.
You tell me, because you have the old book. Charlie and the Reality Theory. Charlie Chinwagger, like so many others who inhabit the third rock from the sun, was in general semantics parlance an intentionally oriented individual. Such a person tends to rely on abstract verbal definition about what is going on in the world. He believed in meaningless mumbo-jumbo, tried Bright Smile toothpaste, new with dinochlorosil. He used gobbledygook at work. Pupil placement and articulation procedures should amalgamate and aggregate a diverse and assorted amount of data and data to produce relevant information. And he practiced verbal magic. If I think a movie is great, it is great. Charlie's over-reliance on words to derive meaning made him oblivious to reality. Then one day reality bit him. To be more precise, his neighbor's dog, Friendly, whom Charlie had always believed to be a kind canine because of his name, took a chunk out of Chuck's leg. When Charlie complained to Friendly's owner about the incident, the fellow replied, "Why did you try to pet Friendly when he was running around my yard? Didn't the fact that I put a muzzle on him when we go out for walks mean anything to you? And you've seen the mailman upholster his dog repellent when he delivers mail." When Charlie went to the office the next morning, reality once more reared its ugly head. His boss, Ken Candid, told him that Sal Sukupski was being appointed head of the Department of Educational Evaluation. Charlie had thought that post was going to be his. Ken, I was taught that those who work hard and play by the rules advance in their careers. I did those things, yet Sukupski, who didn't, is being promoted. There's something wrong with that. Charlie, I'm going to be candid with you, Candid countered. The road to advancement around here is through office politics. Sukupski is a master in that area. If you want to get ahead of this organization, you better revise your theoretical notions about how one moves up the ladder in bureaucracies and take into account what is happening in the place where you're actually working. When Charlie came home that night, he told his wife about his not being promoted, and reality bit him once again. Charlie, I'm having an affair with Tom, the guy who lives in the apartment across the hall. I'm leaving you. Charlie was taken aback by his wife's declaration. Then, after shattering all the dishes in the kitchen, overturning a lazy boy recliner and an oversized couch in the living room, and screaming so loudly that the police were called to come to his house, he composed himself and said, Chastity, I don't believe this is happening. How long have you been having this affair? For a little over a year, his wife replied. I thought you knew about it. I figured you put two and two together when you discovered Tom's underwear under our bed. In fact, I thought you knew about our tryst even earlier than that. For example, when you came across Tom and me having drinks at the Cuckold Lounge 3 months ago, or when you found Tom's love letter to me on our kitchen table right after that. Charlie silently counted to 100 before responding. Then he said, Tom's letter led me to believe Tom liked you, and I didn't think you were having an affair, and I thought you were having drinks with Tom to bolster his confidence of talking to women. You told me he's shy and has trouble getting dates. As for Tom's underwear, I assume you left his briefs in the dryer in the laundry room, and when you were doing your laundry, it simply got mixed in. Charlie, do you know what the word clueless means? Yes, I do, and I think that's what I am. When he got up the next morning and went into the bathroom to shave, Charlie was surprised to find a small imaginary being with magical powers and a human form sitting opposite him atop the medicine cabinet. Who are you, Charlie asked. My name is Clinkerbell. I am a reality fairy. You can call me Clink. What is a reality fairy? A reality fairy tries to help humans who are out of it get back into it. To be more precise, the reality fairy provides people with useful tips and ideas on how to solve everyday problems. Wow, Charlie exclaimed. I can't believe I'm talking to a fairy. This whole situation seems unreal. It would be if this were an academic treatise or a non-fiction work of literature, the sprite responded. But as this is a fairy tale, the situation you find yourself in is perfectly plausible. So, Clink, how did you know I needed your help? Fairyland Central monitors human behavior and cognition. When an individual reaches a dangerous level of unreality, a call goes out to a reality fairy to provide aid to that person. You hit your level when you were denied that promotion at work. Geez, I've never heard of reality fairies, but then I never knew that Disney World is actually larger than 17 different countries. Okay, Clink, in what way can you assist me? I can supply you with guidelines for what is known in General Semantics as extensional thinking, the pixie replied. What's extensional thinking? It's an attitude toward living that involves orienting oneself primarily to the facts. I would like to orient myself that way, Charlie said. Go ahead, hit me with your best stuff. I'll be glad to. Rule number 1. Check the map, your experiences, image, and words against the territory. The experiences, image, and words it represents. For example, a dog named Friendly is not necessarily a friendly dog. That's true, Charlie replied. And a wife named Chastity is not necessarily a virtuous woman. Rule number 2. Use the scientific method, observe, test, evaluate, to solve everyday problems. Had you done that with respect to your efforts at career advancement, you wouldn't have been sandbagged by Sakupski. True again, Charlie said. I would have noticed what was going on in the office and these different strategies to get ahead there. Rule number 3. To make accurate assessments of situations and to avoid jumping to wrong conclusions about them, learn how to distinguish inferences from facts. Factual statements are made after observation or experience, are confined to what one observes or experiences, and represent a high degree of probability. If you had focused on the facts vis-a-vis your wife's behavior with Tom, you might have figured out what they were up to. I bet I would have, Charlie said. These rules are great. I can't wait to put them into practice. Do you have any other guidelines for me? I do, but unfortunately I can't stay here any longer. I just received an urgent text message to go to Washington, D.C. Fairyland Central has determined that the President and the Congress are so out of touch with reality that the Republic is in danger. If you want more information on extensional thinking, I suggest you contact the Institute of General Semantics. How do I do that? Google the Institute on your computer. So long, Charlie. I wish you the best. And as they used to tell us back in training, keep it real. So that's that story. Any comments or questions on that one? Yes.
Charlie did observe all the facts in reality of what he could see.
Yes.
His inferences and his deductions based on his overall perception of his emotional relationship to his wife led him to the wrong conclusion.
Yes.
But in no case did he miss facts or facts being facts. It was his interpretation of the facts that led him to the wrong conclusion. So even if he followed that suggestion and the general semantics rules exactly as said to him, he would have still come to the wrong conclusion because his conclusion was based on things not factually in evidence or things that were not in the material world, such as emotional relationships or the reality of his wedding vows, if you want to go back in the contract that they had with one another.
Well, that's an interesting point, but you're right, he was so emotionally involved, his perceptions became the reality. But in fact...
They didn't become the reality, they colored his interpretation of the reality.
Well, you could also, I'll take your words for it, but how to use general semantics, he might have slowed down and might have thought more logically in applying these rules, and even though emotionally he was so involved with those perceptions, he might have thought, maybe I should think about what I'm perceiving. Yes?
Why is it called extensional?
Why did Courgette come up with the notion of extensional?
Yes.
There is something by extension. Lance, can you provide more of the extensional aspect of it?
Extensional is outward looking.
Yeah.
You know, it's focused on the outer reality, and intentional is not with INTNT, it's INTNS,
right?
And it's inward looking. It's based on, there's the old saying, we see things not as they are, but as we are. So that's intentional. Seeing things as they are, or trying to, as best we can, would be extensional.
Right, so...
And the spelling, he's right. It's intentional, INTENSIONAL. So it's not, I really should have, you would have seen it had you been reading it. Maybe you should keep the talk. No, but actually, it's words that he came up with, as Lance says, for your own point of view without looking more widely into the world. And extensional was more like the scientific method, trying to figure out, no one can really exactly figure out reality because it's perception, they're a filter. But these are words he came up with, and extensional with the S.
Kind of a lifetime project.
Yes. I would say, right.
To the other.
Right, it is a lifetime project.
But it is the idea of reality testing. It's like not not taking things for granted, but constantly checking them out, testing things out.
Even if you don't like it.
Yeah. Or even if you really like them and really want to believe that it's true, you got to still check and make sure.
Yeah, and the application of the scientific method.
Yeah.
And the idea is, you experiment to see what's going on.
Did you talk about testing things out in terms of experience, your own, like almost bodily experience of reality?
Yeah, he was very much, As a matter of fact, Charlotte Reed, his secretary, did a lot of these sensory workshops. And back in the day, they did a lot of sensory workshops where you would get in touch with your own senses and focus in on them to be more attuned with your senses and what's going on in the world. Very much so. We don't do that much today with General Semantics, which I think is a shame. But he was. You are correct about that. Any other comments or questions?
You got one over here.
Yes.
In my opinion,
Oh, well, didn't hear you.
yeah, exactly.
That's right, exactly. And of course, but it is right. And of course, you can didactic about General Semantics. I said, when I learned this in '78, I was insufferable. And, people just shut up. I don't want to hear about it. Leave me alone. I said, well, I'm so superior. I know so much more than these people do. I did the same thing. It's interesting. When I started teaching back in '78, it's an interesting story. I was in the cafeteria among teachers, and they were all complaining. I remember I was a new teacher. The teachers at the table in the lunchroom were all complaining about something, and I tried to answer their complaints. I said, well, maybe you should try this, and maybe you should try that. And the hateful looks I would get. And then I realized, wow, they don't want to hear logical stuff. They just want to hear complaining. So what I did is the following week, I just said, yeah, I got out here like this, and this is no good. Well, became great friends with all of them. So the trick is, logic and general semantics is good in its place, but you have to pick your shots. And I think Korzybski would agree with that. But it's good to know about it. It's a tool. These are tools that you can use selectively. I mean, it's not a rigorous thing. Like, you must think a certain way all the time. I mean, I write poetry. You really can't use a lot of the tools of general semantics necessarily for poetry. Korzybski loved poetry. He was married to an artist. So, it's about selecting and being discriminating and using general semantics formulations that way. But knowing about them is helpful. And it's really too bad that more people don't use general semantics, even in discussions. Political discussions, it's really hard to have a political discussion these days where people aren't on extreme sides. And I've noticed that because, well, I'm not a typical New York liberal, I'm a centrist. But I have some friends who are Trump supporters, and occasionally I agree with them on issues, and they're so relieved. Wow, can't believe you're saying that. Oh, liberals are saying this and the other thing. I said, well, maybe we should just try to do issue by issue, and not just have teams, and let's talk about specific issues. So, yes.
Do you have a fairy tale? Do you have
a fairy tale?
No, that would give us an example of how to do that. Is there one of your stories that's a story like that?
Rather political.
One where both sides say exactly the same thing about the other side, except they're always wrong.
That's the one about Postman and Bacon.
Well, there is a Postman and Bacon.
That might be helpful for us today to learn if we can use it in discourse with our friends.
What do you think the Postman and Bacon one would be? All right, let me do the Postman and Bacon one. That's an interesting one. This is Professor Postman brings home the bacon. And this is about Postman. In a lovely little village where the flowers bloom, birdies chirp, and butterflies flutter by fragrant fields of forsythias and forget-me-nots, there lived a young couple by the name of Jen and Jerry. The two J's, like lots of other people in the contiguous 48 states and Alaska and Hawaii, existed in a state of language unawareness. A crucial characteristic of people with this condition is a propensity to employ what NYU professor and general semantic expert Neil Postman labels Stupid talk. Such talk is typified by a confused direction, an inappropriate tone, or words not well suited to their context. Stupid talk does not or cannot achieve its aim. Let's look in at Jen and Jerry at the start of a typical day. It is 7 in the morning. Jen enters the kitchen. She sits down and says good morning. Her husband says the same. Then he places some bacon and eggs before her. She starts to eat. Jen: the bacon is a little crisp this morning. Jerry: what? Jen: the bacon, it's way too crisp. Jerry: I always make it that way. Jen: not this way. It's too crisp, almost burnt. Jerry: really? Why don't you make it yourself? Then you can have the bacon just the way you want. Jen: why don't you get a job at an office somewhere? Then you can earn a salary and have all the money you want. Jerry: you don't call what I do a job? Writing novels is hard work. As a matter of fact, it's damn hard work. I face blank pages every day and have to fill them with original thoughts. Jen: how about this for original thought? Go to cooking school and learn how to make bacon that's fit for human beings to eat. Jerry: how about you go to a school that teaches people to be grateful for those who make meals for them and clean up around the house? Jen: I don't have time to go to a school like that because I have to travel into town to work every day. Someone in this family has got to make dough to pay the bills around here. Jerry: we made a deal when we got married that I would do the housework and write at home and you would practice law in the city. I'm keeping up my end of the bargain, but if you want to renegotiate our agreement, that's fine with me. In the meantime, I hope you choke on your bacon. Perhaps we should leave them in the kitchen before the pots and pans get thrown around the room. Jen and Jerry had been having arguments like this one just described for several years, and they did not make for conjugal bliss. One night after a particularly truculent blow-up, Jen decided she would take action against the stupid talk marring the happy relationship she wanted to have with her spouse. The next day she telephoned Neil Postman, whom she had met when Postman gave a talk at a local library about how to communicate more effectively. After explaining the bacon brouhaha to Postman, Jen said, I want to stop having fights with my husband that's been out of control. Can you give me some advice on how to do that? Sure, Postman replied. Communication is tricky. We may think we are talking about something simple, like bacon being too crisp, but too crisp is a matter of interpretation. Every nervous system is unique and will experience crispness in its own way. Furthermore, as general semanticists are fond of pointing out, people will often respond not only to the subject matter of our remarks, but to our remarks as well. They may not like, for example, our point of view or form of address, and so they say something that refers in part to the gist of our remarks, like in the example you gave me, to the condition of the bacon, and in part to how they interpret our message. When it is our turn to speak, instead of focusing on the condition of the bacon, we respond to the attacks on us. Before long, the particulars concerning 2 slices of perhaps overcooked bacon have been relegated to the waste heap, and our comments are solely driven by comments that are far from the topic we were originally discussing. I completely get what you're saying, Jen said. I bugged out when Jerry told me he always makes bacon the same way and said stupid stuff about wanting him to get a conventional job, which I know he would hate. That was clearly a mistake. It most assuredly was, Jen. The situation was doing all the talking here, and to the extent that you and Jerry could not fend off what was happening or redirect it, you were both engaging in stupid talk, which you both were almost certain to regret at a later date. It is nearly always a problem when a semantic process has gotten going and you do not know how it started, and most especially how to stop it. That makes total sense to me, Professor Postman. You're the man, and I intend to be the woo man. By applying what you said to keep me from engaging in stupid talk with my husband. The snippet of dialogue that follows, which occurred a few days later, is evidence that Jen is being successful in her goal. Jen. I find the bacon a little crisp this morning. Jerry. What? Jen. The bacon seems a bit crisp. Jerry. I always make it that way. Jen. Gee, I must be getting old or something. I never noticed. Do you think it might be possible for you to make me another couple of slices a little less crisp? Jerry. I think I could do that. End of story.
Yeah.
Let's hear it for Professor Postman, because most of the dialogue is in the book that he wrote. And it's really not so much about the words, but about being diplomatic and about understanding where the other person is coming from. And so that's an important part of general semantics also, yes.
And there's one more point. How could you do that to make it less crispy or whatever? If you tell the person or give a suggestion, that might be a good idea.
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
Because if they don't know, if they've done it like this forever, saying, why don't you make it less crispy? How can I do that? You know.
Right, but there's also how's the person going to respond to that. I mean, communication obviously is tricky. It's just words. I'm not telling you anything new here. It's body language, it's tone of voice, right? I mean, because the person, context.
Well, what I'm trying to say is you can respond better to suggestions than to criticism. You know, if you say this is terrible, then that's the end of it.
Typically.
Yeah.
Well, then some people say, really? I'd like to improve.
Yeah, right.
Well, there aren't, no, you never know. But I mean, yeah, if you say something like that's terrible, you're looking for a fight. And typically you'll get it. That's true. Any other comments or suggestions? Okay, well, I'll call it quits now. So this is your chance to contribute to the Institute of General Semantics and get an autographed book of the second edition. There may be a third edition, but who knows? But this is your chance to get it now. But thank you for being a good audience.
Thank you to Marty, and remember, May 1st for our next session. Be there or be square.
What's the topic?
That's the beat.
Okay. It's a Wednesday, yes.
May Day.
May Day.
Are you marching in the parade? No.
And what time is it? 7:30?
So, what?
Mm-hmm.